Welcome back to the place we find ourselves. I'm Adam Young, and I am joined today by my good friend Sandy. This is really two episodes in one. In the first half, we talk about sexual abuse that doesn't involve physical touch, which is also known as subtle sexual abuse or covert sexual abuse. And then in the second half of the episode, Sandy graciously reads a story from when she was 5 years old. And as we reflect on Sandy's story, we see how a single story can affect our brain for decades. As Sandy puts it, I don't think I was ever the same after that day. So as you listen, I invite you to consider, what are the stories of your life? Stories that may have lasted as short as 10 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 seconds, but stories about which some part of you knows, I was never the same after that day. So I am here on the line with my friend Sandy. Sandy, it is so good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Adam.
Can you talk a little about where you are geographically, where you spend a lot of your time geographically, because you are a traveler, and just what you're up to these days?
Sure. I am currently in North Carolina. My husband Gary and I do a lot of traveling. We actually just came back from a trip to Bosnia-Herzegovina, Albania, and Turkey. And one of the things that we have the privilege of doing is coming along Christians who are working cross-culturally, and we get the opportunity to interact with them over areas of personal healing, emotional, spiritual, relational health.
I mean, let's be honest. You guys are in the trenches dealing with missionaries we know are often wounded people.
Yes.
Just statistically. And you are in the trenches dealing with missionaries in the area of their woundedness and in the areas of the deeper places of their hearts and their stories.
Yes. Part of the reason we are getting to do this is because we both come out of a missions background. Gary and I actually met studying culture and missions and got married, spent 9.5 years in the Middle East on a team there. Another 6 years later on in Eastern European country, working with pastors and churches and missionaries there. So it comes out of a lot of stories of our own pain and the healing that God brought.
And one of the things, that I've learned from you and Gary, just kind of anecdotally, is you are in a lot of different cultures, and story is always so relevant across cultures.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I think individual stories, cultural stories, I think our historical story as nations, story is all over everything.
Yeah. So when did Sandy first learn that she had a story?
When did I first learn that I had a story? I think I became aware that there were problems when I was living in the Middle East. And I remember walking actually one day down the street to visit one of my Arab neighbors and thinking, why would anyone be attracted to the Christianity that I'm experiencing? Because I was so aware of how my life lacked joy. I had everything I was doing felt like I was doing it out of duty and obligation and not out of joy. And I remember thinking, I just have one set of rules to offer them for another. So that's where I became aware that something is wrong. I was aware of a disconnect between what I said I believed and what I was actually experiencing. So that was kind of towards the middle end of our 9 years there. And then God orchestrated some really beautiful things that brought us to a church in Phoenix. And it was during the time that we were there that I feel like I was really seen by one of the pastors there and entered into a counseling relationship with him that made me aware that something is going on. And one of the first things we went after is that I had the symptoms of somebody that had been either spiritually or sexually abused. And then that led to me spending time with another woman who really helped me realize that in my story, there were ways that my father had interacted me that really had sexually harmed me. There was a relationship with my church and a boyfriend where there was a lot of spiritual abuse involved. So there were a number of things that I had not ever been able to name. Prior to that, I always thought something's wrong with me. I should be happy, or I should be, and never could connect it to anything, to my story.
Yeah. And even as you talk about your father interacting with you in ways that were sexually harmful, it's like you're carefully choosing your language. and it sounds to me like there was not physical violation. There was not touch.
There was not touch until I was an adult. But prior to that, it was looks, it was comments, it was more subtle things. And it still is hard for me to say I'm sexually abused.
Yeah. And sorry to interrupt you, but this is such a profound, tormenting thing for me personally, for you, for so many. To acknowledge what the data clearly, overwhelmingly shows, which is that subtle sexual innuendos, looking you up and down as you go out for a date, commenting on a particular outfit that you're wearing. These things have sexual overtones. I mean, sex is not in the touch, it's in the interactive field. And sexuality can be so much at play in subtle ways between a father and a daughter. And it can be devastating, particularly because it goes under the radar. I mean, you have no sense of I was sexually abused.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Until well into adulthood.
Yep.
So can you say some about what that was like for you, Sandy?
Yeah. I mean, actually, I appreciate you saying that. And it was actually, I remember the day that my daughters came up to me and said, Mom, why does Grandpa look at us the way he looks at us? Why does Grandpa ask us those questions about how much I weigh? And, it was then when my daughters, and I had this aha moment, oh my gosh, that's what I was feeling when I was their age, and my dad would do that to me. And so it was their questions, the harm that they were receiving from him, that enabled me to go back and actually say, no, what my dad did was really wrong.
And it was sexually abusive.
And it was sexually abusive, yes.
Yeah, and the byproducts of physical sexual abuse and the byproducts of what we call covert sexual abuse are the same. The wars unleashed in the heart are the same.
Yeah.
The torment is the same.
I remember when I first was introduced to the Journey Open Hearts Ministries Journey groups, and they have a whole list of clues to your story. I could go down and I marked, probably 70% of the symptoms or clues of someone who had been abused. And I'm going, how can this be? I don't have an abuse story.
Right. And it makes you feel absolutely nuts.
Yes, it does. It makes you feel nuts. And it also just kind of reinforces that sense of something's wrong with me.
Yes.
Obviously, I mean, what is wrong with me that I have all these symptoms of someone who has these stories and I don't?
I wasn't molested. I wasn't raped. My grandfather didn't come into my room and fondle me, right? And that's the stories that fill the books that show that leads to these symptoms. And I have 70% of these symptoms, but no cause.
No, you're right. Exactly, Adam. Yeah. It is crazy making. It is.
And it invariably leads to this profound sense of there must be something wrong with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But your daughters had a very different, they had different parents, and that allowed them to ask a very simple question. Why does he look at me like that? You never would have thought to ask that question.
Yeah. And there would have been nobody to ask it of. Yeah. I just knew the discomfort. I actually, this was years after I started, processing my story and stuff, did a collage. One of the things I get to do now is invite people into doing collages using magazine pictures, words, and stuff. And for me, I find that just helps me name and hold on to what happened. And so I actually did a collage where it was a large poster board paper, and I kind of did a sketch of our house as a child growing up and represented every room in the house and had a picture on there of something sexually that had happened in every single room of my house. And that has been so meaningful to me. I mean, I pulled it out yesterday in preparation for this to go, okay, no, what happened to me harmed me, and here's why. I can see it there. I can't minimize the pictures as much as I can my words.
Yeah, and there's a neuroscientific reason for that. Collage, photos, images, art activates the right portion of the limbic brain where deep harm resides, where shame resides, where sexuality largely resides. And so when you are engaged in that artistic endeavor of making a collage, of looking for images that just have this sense of fittedness,
yes, yeah,
to your life, you may not even understand what the image is saying, but it's telling you the truth of the story of your life.
Yes. Yep.
And in that sense, collages can be prophetic. You put them together, and then they actually teach you more than what you realized.
Yeah, I really agree. I've experienced that as well.
So I, too, have struggled with this naming sexual abuse for what it is. In fact, Dan Allender wrote a book called The Wounded Heart, and the subtitle is something about childhood sexual abuse in the subtitle. And somebody gave me the book. I didn't have sexual abuse. I knew I didn't have sexual abuse in my background, but I started reading the book because I'm curious. And as I'm reading the book, I'm like, this is describing the landscape of my heart. But in order to keep reading it, every time he put in the word sexual abuse, and it's still in my copy, I have a black Sharpie and I would cross out the word sexual.
Okay.
Because I couldn't read the book without doing that. So in my copy of the book, every time it says sexual, it's just crossed out. So when you read the sentence, it just says abuse. Because I knew that I had some abuse, but I couldn't own sexual abuse. And that story, well, I'll let that story stand for what it is. So you began diving into your story both on the mission field early on, became aware that something's not right inside. And then this pastor combined with this woman in Phoenix begin to name for you that you have been both spiritually and sexually abused.
Yes.
And what did that unleash? What did that start? What journey did that put you on?
First of all, I remember just talking to this woman about my family and relaying a story of where I think I was in probably junior high, and we had one shower in our home, and I wanted to take a shower. And so I knocked on the door of the bathroom because it was closed, and my father opens the door and is exposing himself to me. And I remember sharing that to her, and her response of anger shocked me. I just thought, oh man, I must have said it wrong because my dad's doesn't deserve that kind of anger. And so I backpedaled all the time. I mean, and really, Adam, that was in 1996 or 7, I think, when I started naming abuse. 2 years ago, a good friend of mine who's a therapist says, Sandy, why is it that you still don't believe the people in your life who tell you you've been sexually abused? Why can't you own that, name that? So, I mean, it has been a long push, pull, back, forth process And I still have a hard time. I mean, you heard my softening the words at the beginning. It's still so hard for me to name it. We have a friend that talks about they work for the airline, and they talk about how there's rapid decompression that happens in an airplane where the oxygen leaves, and then there's a slow decompression. I think in stories where our abuse is so subtle, we don't have a rapid decompression event. We have slow decompression that happens over a long, long time. And I'm curious if there's a pattern in this, but I know for me, my healing didn't come with a dramatic recognition. It's come like the harm came slowly in stops and starts and
yes.
movement forward, small choices to name what's true, acting differently, making different choices. Nothing dramatic in my healing, but continual steady movement towards healing and naming what's true.
Yeah. And, to go back to the anecdote, the vignette of your just the innocence of you knocking on the door, right? To try and have a boundary. And then your father exposing himself, a grown man, to you. Our tendency is to say that's not sexual abuse. And all I can do for the listeners is to plead with you. It is. It is. It is. It has the same effects on the brain. And in some respects, I don't know how else to put it except like this. Ultimate evil is ultimately subtle. The more subtle the abuse, the more damaging, the more deep, the more it penetrates, the more it torments. And so subtle abuse, overt abuse, all damaging. But the difficulty with more subtle forms of abuse is that it can be really hard to be convinced that it was real.
Yes.
And that it did damage. And whether it's a parent exposing him or herself to you, or just letting you have a glance of your mother removing her blouse through the doorway, or whether it's you're in the shower and your father has no boundaries about coming into the bathroom when you're in the shower, and he doesn't even have to pull the curtain back. You're naked. You're a 14-year-old girl taking a shower, and you know that your father is on the other end. You don't think there's sexual energy in the bathroom at that point?
Yes.
I mean, these are the things that do damage.
Yeah, I agree. My story is I would be, because the shower was in their bedroom. So I would take my shower, and I could almost every single time, especially from the time of middle school on, I would come out of my shower and my father would be laying in his bed.
Yes. And it was not an accident.
No, it didn't matter what time of day it was. And so I would always have to walk past that.
It just sends a shudder up my spine, because it was daily. And I like how you put it. It didn't matter what time of day it was. This was not the coincidence of two morning routines.
Yeah.
This was somebody propped up on his bed waiting for a show.
Yeah.
And that's what you had to walk through and walk by, times without number. It is devastating to the heart.
Yeah.
And to the body, because it puts us at wars with our body. But I'm going to do another episode specifically on covert sexual abuse.
I'm so glad you are, Adam, because I do. I just think it truly is. I mean, I remember a therapist just saying that they'd rather work with someone who has really obvious, like capital A sexual abuse than the subtle, because it's so hard to get those of us that have had subtle abuse to be able to name what's true.
You are willing to share a story that you have written about. Well, I won't say what it's about. I'll let you read the story.
The mid-February California weather was as bright and crisp as I felt. The dress I put on that Tuesday afternoon was nicer than usual, and I had on my favorite black patent shoes. Aunt Jo helped me brush my fine blonde, wavy, shoulder-length hair and tie a red bow in it. I was ready and anxious to get to school. It was Valentine's Day, and my teacher, Miss Penman, had been telling us for a week that we were going to have a party at school today. She had told us to bring Valentine's cards to give to our friends. This past Saturday, Mom had taken me to Thrifty's and let me choose a pack of Valentine's cards. I picked real pretty ones with pictures of kids giving gifts to each other and some that had flowers and butterflies on them. The cards were cut in heart shapes and had small white envelopes that perfectly fit the size of the cards. When we got home from the store, I looked at each card and carefully chose which one I wanted for each of my friends. Mom asked if I wasn't supposed to bring cards for everyone in the class. I thought, that was strange, but then she hadn't heard my teacher's instructions. I told her, no, teacher told us we were to bring cards to give to our friends. That's exactly what I had done. Into my school bag went the pretty heart-shaped cards carefully chosen and signed with my name. I was excited and ready to go. The school day started surprisingly like every other day, except that there were pink and red crepe paper streamers hung up in our room with red and white hearts that we had made last week hung on the walls. It was pretty. Finally, the time came to exchange Valentine cards with our friends. We eagerly brought our chairs to an open area in the classroom and formed them in a circle as our teacher instructed. After we sat down, Miss Penman told us that we would take turns walking around the circle, dropping the cards we had brought into our classmates' decorated bag. The first child stood up and dropped a card into each eagerly held out bag. Wow, I thought, Jimmy brought a card for everyone. The second child did the same. Walking around the entire circle, Cindy placed a card in every one of the bags. Then the third, fourth, fifth. Everyone was doing the same. I felt myself flush and physically shrink in my chair. Am I the only one who didn't know we were supposed to bring cards for everyone? The teacher had said to bring cards for our friends. Not everyone in the class is my friend. I feel so much confusion and shame and anxiety. What am I going to do? I don't have enough cards to get around the circle. I can't walk past all the kids with their open bags expecting a card to get to the 8 friends I had chosen to give cards to. What am I going to do? How could I have been so stupid? Everyone is giving me a card and everyone is getting cards. I still had at least 10 kids to go before my turn came. With each round, I felt the weight of my mistake and the fear of being humiliated in front of the class. I so wanted to leave, but there was nowhere to go. Finally, as my turn came, I got up. Unable to look my classmates in the eye, I put cards in the bags of the first 8 kids I came to. Most of the friends I had brought cards for didn't get them. I sat back down in my chair and received cards from the rest of my classmates. I had gotten cards from every one of my classmates, and I had only given 8. How did I get that so wrong? How did everyone know but me? The excitement that I had felt at the beginning of the day was replaced with confusion, humiliation, shame, and embarrassment. That night, my brother must have told my mom that my crying was keeping him up, because she, in an uncustomary way, came into our room after the light was turned off, sat on the edge of my bed, and asked me what was wrong.
Thank you, Sandy. So can we reflect on it some?
Sure.
It strikes me from the beginning that this is going to be an awesome day.
Yeah.
Like, you're how old? 5?
5, yep.
Right? And you have gone to Thrifty's. You have chosen Valentines for your 8 friends. You have chosen specific ones. You've enjoyed decorating them.
Yeah.
There's an innocence to this 5-year-old girl and a deep anticipation for like a fun day. This is going to be so fun. There's streamers. Everything has been geared toward this day.
Yeah.
And then everything shifts when you realize what is going on.
Yeah.
What's it like for you in that moment? Do you imagine?
Well, it feels like it was devastating. I mean, yeah, and confusion, really confused.
because your teacher had told you to bring Valentines for your friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you had 8 of them.
Mm-hmm.
There is an integrity to that 5-year-old girl.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
There is an integrity there. She's a rule follower.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And part of the integrity is, if I don't feel like that person is my friend, then they're not my friend, and I'm not going to make them a Valentine's Day card.
And the fact that at 5, I was so clear as to who my friends were feels pretty impressive.
Extremely impressive. I mean, this is a girl who is clear in her heart about connections.
Yeah.
And then the sentence in the story that is, there are a lot of devastating sentences, but the one where you say, "Am I the only one who didn't know we were supposed to bring cards for everyone?" That sentence, "Am I the only one?" I mean, in some ways, that's the essence of shame. Those 5 words, "Am I the only one?"
Yeah.
And with the shame always comes contempt.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what happens next in the story with the sentence, "How could I have been so stupid?"
And really, when I look back on my life, I don't think I was ever the same after this story, after this incident. I mean, my memories of my childhood are, I was a really serious kid. I worked hard in school to get grades. And part of that's connected to it was a healthier way to get my father's attention than the sexual attention I would get. So I chose the grades that got his attention as well. But I don't think I was ever as excited and carefree and anticipating a fun day ever again until many, many, many decades later.
Yeah. And so it has come up in so many of these interviews. And I still find it hard to believe, but I have so much overwhelming data to know that it's true, both in my life and in the lives of others. An individual story like this, which was probably, 30 minutes of your life in that classroom, marked you in such a way that the neural circuitry of your brain changed so deeply that your life looked and felt different for decades following this story.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it's really hard to believe it. And again, it's one of those things. This is nothing. There was no violence, criminal activity, nothing. And yet the impact it had on me has been deep and long lasting.
Yes. And one of the things that I notice about the story is you're silenced in the story. In other words, there's no sense of you even thinking about pulling the teacher aside and saying, "Oh, I didn't realize we were supposed to bring cards for everyone." Like, "Oh, no, I didn't realize that. I'm so sorry. This feels awful. I didn't know." Like, this girl is not going to use her voice to say that. Yes.
Yeah. And how did that happen so young? I mean, where was the teacher? I have no memory of how my teacher interacted with me. I mean, she had to have seen what was happening, that something was happening.
Right.
My mom, I have often wondered, why in the heck didn't my mom say, "Come on, Sandy, let's just put the cards in your bag and you don't have to use them, but just bring enough for everybody." I mean, but I think there's lots going on with my mom that was reasons why she didn't do that. But
Yes. And if your teacher had stepped in and explained to the class, just in your hearing, "Oh, Sandy, you misunderstood my instructions," there would have been so many ways she could have literally healed overwhelming shame with a couple of sentences.
Yes.
And like a hand on your shoulder and saying, maybe Sandy, you could get some for the other kids and bring them tomorrow. I mean, there's 1,000 ways that this could have been rectified and different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So we could call it an epilogue to the story, but in some ways, in my mind, it's the heart of the story. And it is when your brother convinces your mother to come and check on you because, frankly, you're annoying him with your crying that night.
Yeah. And honestly, Adam, that is not a clear memory. I am filling in the gaps with what I suspect was likely. Mm-hmm. Because at that point, my brother and I were sharing a room. My mom, I have no memory of my mom ever coming in after the initial goodnight kiss on the forehead. And so that's the only explanation I can come up with is why she showed up that night. And my brother was the one she always looked to protect. So I'm assuming it was for him, not me.
So whether your memory of this is foggy or not, the data of the rest of the story of your life, you've already named the heartache. Your mother tended to your brother in a way that she did not. And you write it as in an uncustomary way. Mm-hmm. Mom came into my room. Another way of saying that, if I'm hearing you right, is your mother never came into your room to check on you after kissing you goodnight.
Right. I have no memory of that ever happening. Yeah.
And in this instance, she sat on the edge of your bed and then she asked you what was wrong.
Yeah.
Now, for 5-year-old Sandy, this is a new experience. This has never happened.
Yeah.
What happens for you in that moment, do you imagine, Sandy?
In that moment, I'm not sure, but I know that I have spent so much of my childhood into adulthood feeling like, why am I such a bad daughter? I had looked at that story for so long as though Mom tried to comfort me and I just wouldn't receive it. Mm-hmm. But I question now as an adult that I don't think she was trying to comfort me. I think she was just trying to get me to stop crying because I have no memory of receiving any comfort from that at all.
Yeah, and let's just be clear. Your face when you walked in the door, after school, was fallen.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know how your mother made it from 3:30 when you get home until bedtime before she says, honey, why is your heart devastated? You were so looking forward to this day. How was it? How do you not see this girl?
Yeah. And how did you not anticipate the harm that was going to come when she brought 8 cards to a class of 26?
Yeah.
The only thing I can come to is she wanted to teach me some kind of lesson. I was always labeled as stubborn, reserved, independent. None of those were positive terms in my family. And so she's going to teach her stubborn, independent daughter a lesson.
Yes. Yeah. And so it is stunning that by 5 years old, you are pretty clear that there is not going to be comfort from your mother when you are in pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the way we tend to make sense of that is we tend to say, I didn't receive her comfort, or I was withdrawn, or I couldn't receive what she was offering. And please, it is nonsense. A 5-year-old is biologically wired to receive soothing, comfort, care.
Yeah.
But you were so clear that this was not an option that you never reached.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel so sad for myself at that age. I mean, I remember a story at 2.5 where that became evident too, that that's not gonna come from them.
And so it's obvious, but just to say, the loneliness of that girl is immense.
Yeah.
Like, it's not merely that your mother has formed an alliance with your brother and is against you, and that your father is turning to you. As awful as those dynamics are, the net result of all of that is you are utterly alone in frankly, a terrifying world.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and really in that aloneness, I think that's where some of my spiritual church abuse came in, is because I started looking to what I was getting at church to give me guidance.
Of course.
To give me comfort. Yeah. So, I mean, I remember in, late elementary school, I think probably 5th or 6th grade, I would be home alone because my mom was working at that point, and I'd be home alone before I had to go to school. My brother went early, and I would put on a record that was the song, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, the old turntable records. And I would listen to that over and over and over again, crying, pleading with God to give me a best friend, because I was so alone. It was my 4th elementary school at that point. I didn't know anyone at the school, and just pleading with God, and then feeling guilty that Jesus wasn't enough of a friend. And then I became even more of a rule follower, following the rules at school to get the A's, following the rules at church to keep God happy, but it was some semblance of order and comfort's not the right word, but it gave me some structure or something that I could look to.
Mm-hmm. And so you've already touched on it, but what happened in your heart in the aftermath of this story?
I think, you named it earlier, just the shame of how am I the only one that didn't know, and how could I be so stupid? I just think it just kind of solidified in me the sense of something's wrong with me. Something's not right. I'm missing. I'm different. Somehow other people get it and I don't. And it didn't make me give up. It made me work harder. I worked really, really hard to do things right, to do things well, to not miss anything. I feel like it set me up for a lifetime of I had better be prepared, and I am not going to be caught without enough ever again.
Yes. And inherent in that language, even as a 5-year-old, you are making agreements that are going to bind you for decades. Agreements related to, I will never be unprepared. I will never let this happen again.
Yeah. And really that stayed with me for a long, long time. I mean, I had a job teaching English as a second language, and I would literally prepare hours and hours for a 1-hour class. I mean, it cost my kids, my husband so much, and I never felt like I was going in with enough.
Absolutely not. You're walking into a classroom. I mean, the fact that it's a classroom just feels tormenting. You're going into a classroom and you're not sure if you have 8 or 22 Valentines.
Yeah.
How has your posture towards that 5-year-old changed over the years? Can you take us a little bit into that journey?
Yeah. I actually think it was, again, at an Open Hearts Ministry event. And I think, Adam, this was probably like in 2009. So, I mean, again, we're talking a long, long time of living with that sense of shame and having to be prepared and just not being able to look at her with kindness at all. And I remember sharing the same story to my group, and the leader's response to me was, I don't see a stupid little girl. I see a really bright, integrous, discerning girl who at 5 knew who her friends were. And it just started to shift everything for me. And I thought, oh, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, so I could see the goodness in her, and then to be able to write the story later and see my excitement and my attention to details, my focus on my friends and choosing something special for them, and all of those things of such beauty were there the whole time, but I had not been able to see it because the shame just covered it all. So just having, again, someone else give me a little bit different perspective and going, oh, that's not the girl I see in this story, was really helpful. And then to be able to start speaking that to myself.
Yes. And so just to underscore, when someone else named you well in the context of a story of shame and heartache, your brain began to change pretty profoundly. And at that point, I think of it more as the rapid decompression, at least for a time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There was enough decompression that I could actually see her.
Right.
And hold it for a moment.
Yes. And what a redemptive moment. And it comes from being named well in the context of particular narratives.
Yes. It's hard to believe how profound telling a Valentine story from when I was 5, the profound impact it can have when other people see it and name it.
Oh, Sandy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for this story. Thank you for reflecting with us on what it's looked like for you to engage your story.
It's been so well worth it. Just one other thought I had is that I feel like I had spent so much of my life after that preparing and presenting and never able to be present because I didn't even like who I would be bringing. And the whole thing of healing from past harm, naming what's true, being kind to myself has just led to such richness in being able to be present with myself, present with other people, and to be able to have the 5-year-old pieces of me come back that love beauty and love relationship. And so it's been really a wonderful, hard, but glorious journey.
Yes. Such a good note to end on. Thank you for saying that at the end.